Everyone, welcome to Cozy Conversations. I am Harshita Anand, and I'm a counseling psychologist in India. And I will be your host for this whole podcast. On this podcast, I will be interviewing certain people who have consented to share their stories with me and you all here. I wanted to begin on the note, as I always begin, with that if you can't find hope, I wish hope finds you instead. And on that note, I would like to welcome our today's guest, Tanisha, who is also a therapist. And hi, Tanisha.
Hi, Harshita.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good too. So, before we begin, why don't you introduce yourself, Tanisha? What do you do, who you are?
Sure. So, my name is Tanisha. I am also a counselor based in India. I've done my bachelor's and my master's in psychology and been studying the subject since I was 15, and I've been interested in studying the subject since I was 13. So, for over half my life has been dedicated to this subject. Um, I I do a lot of things outside of therapy and mental health as well. I do a lot of I'm very interested in raising more awareness around mental health. I also just believe a lot in the importance of community. So I do a lot of volunteering and I volunteer for various different causes and go out of my comfort zone to attend like different events, socialize, build more of a community wherever I go. Um
That's really
yeah, I think that's about it.
okay. That was pretty interesting. Would you like to share a little about, what else, like in hobbies or some activities you like to do?
Oh, I have hobbies that change every couple of months, right? So, you know, today it's like, okay, I'm going to read. And the reading is one that has stayed like on and off consistent for several years, like at least like the
Mhm.
last 20 years or something.
Yeah.
Uh, but other things, it's like, oh, I want to paint. So I'll buy like paints and a paint kit and everything. And like, I'll paint like for a couple of months. And then I'm like, oh, I'm bored of this now. So I got into like mosaic making and then I did like one and then I stopped. And then so it keeps changing. Somebody gifted me like this candle making kit and I still not made the candle because I'm like, oh yeah, I have to do this and I will do it. And I really appreciate that it was gifted to me, but I've not done it yet. So it keeps ebbing.
Changing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think so. I would come to you if I want to, find a new hobby to start because you'll have a lot of suggestions, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then at times I just like run out of patience before I even begin. Like I tried to get into like cross stitching,
Mhm.
and I have fairly bad eyesight even with my glasses. And so after like 7, 8 attempts of like attempting to thread the needle, I'm like, this is not meant for me, and I just like gave up before I even begun.
No, I understand. I also have a really bad eyesight, but thankfully my spectacles do a good job. But yeah, I understand the struggle.
Yeah.
Okay. So, considering that you have had a fair share of, experience in mental health field, could you share with us a little bit about more about your background that, how it has influenced your perspective on mental health?
Sure. So in my personal life, my background has been that, as a family, we shifted a lot every few years. So I was born in Bombay. And then when I was 4, we moved to a different city. And then when I was 8, we moved to a different city. And then when I was 10, we moved to a different city and a different country. And then when I was 17, I moved back to
Oh
India.
my God.
And then when I was 20, I moved again. And then at 22, I moved. So it's been a lot of like moving around, you know. Um, and so that has kind of that definitely that definitely had an influence on me in terms of how I relate to people, how I talk to people. I was also like a very shy kid. Like took me some time to open up. I think
Hmm.
as an adult I've kind of been able to like come out of that. But as a child it definitely was something that was there. So like the whole idea of like opening up and talking to people was
Hmm.
something which I was not very good at. Um, and so it took me a long time to make friends. So if we were someplace for 4 years, it took me like a year and a half to make friends, and then we're leaving already.
Must be
So
tough.
It was, but I was very lucky in the sense that the few friendships that I did form were very good, strong ones. Like I'm still in touch with those friends, and we still meet up. And you know,
Yeah.
last last year, I attended like my best friend's wedding from when I was in kindergarten. And
Wow.
yeah, we lost touch. Like she moved to a different city, I moved to a different city, but we reconnected because of like that closeness and that bond that we had.
Hmm.
So yeah.
That's,
Um,
that's beautiful.
Yeah, and in terms of mental health, I think how that has affected how I see mental health. A lot of incidents in life just kind of um, made me realize that, oh, this is a path that I want to study and learn more about. And also just that this was something that I personally was struggling with. Like,
Mm.
I had a lot of my own mental health issues. I don't know how much of it was because of the moving around. I know we talk about like adverse childhood experiences and major life changes and things like that as experts and like in jargony terms, but it's just life. And there were like a lot of events in life that happened. Like there was a flood at our house where we lived, so it was quite scary. And I think I was like 11 at the time. So yeah, I was 11 in 2007, and post that I started struggling a lot with my mental health. Um, and that's when my first hand experience with mental health changed and became a lot more like prominent, and it
Hmm.
started affecting my day to day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's very difficult to actually see a disaster happening in front of you. Like it was a natural. The flood is a huge deal to actually even experience or hear about it, and it's so crazy. And
Yeah.
going through it yourself must have been like really really difficult. Like where were you exactly, if you don't mind sharing?
So we were in Muscat at the time, and there was a cyclone that happened. And the thing is, Muscat is in Oman, which is in like Arabia, Middle
Yeah,
East, Western Asia,
yeah,
that region.
yeah.
And it's a very like desert area, right?
Hmm.
Like geographically speaking. So they're
Yeah.
very under prepared for the rains. Especially
Hmm.
like I'm talking about 2007, which was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And So they were very underprepared for the rains. So when a cyclone hit, it's not regular rainfall. It is cyclonic wind and rain, and so the infrastructure that they had in place was
Hmm.
not really effective. And so what actually like came into our house was not any of the rainwater or anything. There was a dam nearby which kind of overflew and broke, and then that water, like we lived kind of downhill, so that water then ended up flooding the whole place.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
that's tough. That's really tough. I mean, I can only imagine how difficult
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, and because I'm from Bombay, which is a coastal city, and so we have a lot of like family and family friends who are from Mumbai, and for them, this is like this too happens every year. Like it's a very like common situation. And so also just being like, oh, I come from like a lot of privilege that for me this was like a traumatizing once in a lifetime experience, and for them it's just July.
Hmm. Yeah, rains in Mumbai are pretty rough. But yeah, I mean, hmm, okay. I mean, thank you for sharing that. I know it's not an easy experience to have for anybody.
Yeah, and
And
I apologize. I feel like that was quite a heavy note to start on.
no, that's okay. I mean, that's okay. I mean, we are here to talk about mental health. It will mean that you will be sharing a lot of things which will be a little heavy as well. It's not all roses, right?
Yeah.
It will be a little difficult. But yeah. Um, I also wanted to ask you about that, what motivated you to share your mental health journey over here, because I understand that your story you have started with a difficult note, but I understand it must be a very, very difficult step also to even talk about it because it's a lot. So
Right.
what
I mean, one
motivated?
one was that you were looking for volunteers.
Yes, 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 I was.
No, but also because I think it is important to have these conversations.
Hmm.
It took me a very, very, very long time to open up and talk about my mental health to people. And by that I mean, you know, I talked about a story which happened in 2007. It wasn't until 2016 that my parents knew about it. You know, it wasn't until 2016 that my sister knew about it. Because, and again, this is being a psychology student, completing a degree in psychology, applying for a master's in psychology. And only then I was able to open up. And even today, it is um, difficult at times, especially if you don't know how the person in front of you is going to react to it. Um, and where we live, you know, in India and even in just in general in the world, there still is a lot of stigma and taboo around mental health. Uh,
Yes.
there's a lot of like awareness nowadays in maybe the last few years about like, oh, hey, mental health is important, but also please don't talk to me about it. Go talk to someone else about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very like this is a problem, but it's not a problem that should personally impact me.
Yeah.
Uh, right, so there's this kind of like distanced approach to it, and that actually holds a lot of people back from talking about it or seeking support or reaching out for help. And I think the more we talk about it and be like, hey, I did have mental health issues for a major chunk of my life, I still struggle with them from time to time, but I'm still an adult and I'm still doing a fairly good job at dealing with it, and I'm helping others deal with it, and I'm living a life that I'm quite satisfied with, is a very good message for others to know that, oh, that's a possibility. This isn't the end of my life. This isn't the end of the world. There are options for me. I can be doing other things. So I think it's important to have those conversations.
I 100% agree with you. The reason why I started the podcast is also the same, right? Because I think so. What motivated me more was like when in a session, I have taken the permission to share just one line with everybody that somebody said that people are either delusional or depressed. So it just made me feel like that it's so sad that we feel that, the whole world either is unaware that they are depressed or they are actually depressed and they're aware of it. So
Mm.
I was like, you know what, like we really need to talk a little more about hopeful stories as well, that, there's more to life than just
Yeah.
this place where we feel hopeless.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for actually saying yes to this podcast.
Yeah.
And so on this point, I would like to ask you about, since you have had like a very different life as well, because you've moved around and you have had different experiences. If you can recall a significant moment which actually made you feel like, this is a turning moment for me, or this is something which has made a huge impact on me. If there is one specific moment, I'm sure there might be many, but if
Yeah.
you can pick one.
That's actually what I was thinking, right? That like life is a journey and there are a lot of these kinds of moments, right? It's
Yeah.
um ah what is one specific one? I think when I was in eighth standard, so a year after the flood, and I had got into quite a bad mental state, and I hadn't really like acknowledged or like realized or like, you know,
Accepted in a way.
yeah, um, that things were bad.
Hmm.
And I was very, like I said, like I've had a lot of privileges, and I was very lucky to be in a school which had a school counselor and a good school counselor at that. And I was lucky enough to have one of my teachers who was just like, Nisha, I noticed that you've been acting differently, and you see something about you seems off,
Hmm.
and I want you to go and speak to the counselor. So it was kind of like, you have to do this.
Yeah.
Um, Not like an optional thing. And but it was like a big turning point for me, because that was when I first started speaking to someone and got some support, and also like not running away from it or not being like, yeah, no, everything is fine. um and that also then like put me down that career path, because like a year of sessions, 1 year of like those school counseling sessions later, I'm like, I can do this. Like I can do like this is something that I can do. Like this is what I could professionally become when I grow up. uh,
Yeah.
so in that sense, like personally, professionally, both ways, it kind of was one of the major turning points for me. Yeah.
I mean, I think so. it is a very big thing to see a school counselor, having a school counselor in your school, and then somebody actually pushing you towards that. No, you need to go and talk to that person.
Yeah,
And then you're going and meeting that person and realizing, wow, this feels like this can be me there.
yeah,
So, okay, I see then. Okay. I mean, you had a role model in your head already. Like, okay, this is the person. I like this person. I can be like this person.
yeah. I think more than the person, it was like this profession.
Okay.
Yeah, that okay, listening to what's going on in people's lives, I already do that. And because I was always that person, like right from childhood, who people would, and by people I normally mean like adults, would come and like share their problems with, like at times which were not very age appropriate. Like
Yeah.
at 6, I didn't need to know why my neighbor was upset with her husband because he forgot their anniversary, but I still did, and I never knew how to respond in those situations. And
I think so. As adults, also, we don't know how to respond in those situations. A 6-year-old will definitely not know how to.
one of the most appealing things was that I was like, if I become a counselor, I will get training to learn how to respond to these things.
Oh, okay.
One
Yes.
one of one of the appealing things, right? Of course, there was like the altruistic part of it. That okay, I'll be helping people, and I can help people solve, and of course, I'll earn money, and like it will be a profession. All
Yeah.
of those things, right? The whole like ikigai thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. I mean, um, you are definitely a person who people used to be like, I can confide in this person. Let me go and say this to this person.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I understand that you might have even, encountered some misconceptions or stigmas or something around the line which made you feel like people still think that, you know. So, are there any you would like to share? Because, I have heard a lot around the mental health field that, this is
Right.
like some sort of weakness. Can you read my mind? Or,
Of course. Yeah.
all of those. Do you have any which you would like to share as well?
I've heard a lot. I've heard a lot of them. I've heard um the same like, oh, so do you read minds one many times. I was most upset when it came from my cousin.
Wow.
Like I expected better from you, and then I realized that he was still relatively young and he hadn't really been taught anything else. So then I had to like educate him.
Hmm.
I've heard that one. I've heard, oh, it's all just in your head. I'm like, yes, I agree. To some extent, it's in the head, some part of the gut brain axis. And then I
Yeah.
started explaining the gut brain axis to this person, and they just looked at me like I had grown another head or something. They're just like, what is what are you
Oh
talking
my
about?
God.
Somehow, when you talk about the science of it, they lose interest.
Yeah.
Um, I've had like, oh, wear this necklace and wear this bead and it will help you feel better. And um, I one of my cousins got married a couple of years just before the pandemic in like
Yeah.
2019 December, and one of the first big like first weddings in like close family and everything. And my mom, very sweet, right? And she's been quite supportive, and she tries genuinely to understand. I'm sorry, I'm going on like a slight tangent here. You mentioned like this thing your client said about how everyone is either depressed or delusional. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I know mentally healthy people exist because I see my mom and she's so mentally healthy. Like, we talk about like mental wellness and mental illness. She's like in the plus 99th percentile of mentally healthy, you know. Uh,
Wow.
so for her, understanding this is so difficult. And for me, understanding that is so difficult.
Hmm.
So she asked me this question of like, as a depressed person, could you ever get married? And
God. Oh my God.
like,
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my God.
no, I was just like, I was kind of expecting some conversation around marriage to come up, right? Because it's a cousin's wedding, and
Yeah.
oh, next in line, and who's going to get married. I was expecting those kind of questions. I was so thrown by this. Um, and I'm like, there are studies which say that like 1 in 10 people are depressed. If 1 in 10 people were depressed and they were not getting married, the marriage rates would be way lower than what they are.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, yeah, fair enough. Uh, so yeah, I mean, that's been one of the funnier ones.
I think so. This one is one of the wildest I've heard. Like, can you get married if you're depressed? And I'm like, okay.
I think the whole thing is like, if you withdraw from people and you like, you
Yeah,
don't want to be around anyone and you don't want to, like, you struggle with interacting with people when you're having a depressive episode, would you want a
how
life partner in that situation?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I understand. I understand. It's just that when it comes out, like you can imagine people maybe saying it, but when you actually hear it, it's
Mhm.
like, what? Did I just hear that?
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, I
and
mean,
like part of me was like, I should just say yes, we can't get married. So the conversation of marriage never like comes up further ahead in life.
oh
And
my
then I'm
God.
like, no, that let's not do that. Let's do some psychoeducation here. Let's try to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, I can understand that, you know, people have a lot of misconceptions about mental health, and they will have it till the time we don't have more conversations, we don't educate people. And it's good that you were psychoeducating your mother, because it's very, I don't think so a lot of us can actually psychoeducate our parents that easily, because a lot of times it's so they are so rigid sometimes with their beliefs as well. But I'm glad that your mom is understanding enough to sit with you and talk about it, or
Yeah,
even
and again, that also is like one of the signs of like mental wellness, right? That
yeah,
the
exactly.
flexibility. But again, like it's so difficult for her to understand. Like sometimes I will say things and she's like, I have never had that thought ever in my entire life, because it's so unrelatable to her.
Wow. I
Like,
would, your mom is mentally healthy. That sounds so good. Like, wow.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you have somebody around you who has such healthy thoughts that they can be like, oh, I am mentally healthy. It's okay. And okay, great. But I think so. You've had a very mixed journey, like people being supportive and people also coming and asking absurd things. And at the same time, how was your mental health journey when it came personally to, taking therapy? How was that for you?
So again, like it started with school counseling. It started with a very much like, I'm framing this as a suggestion, but it's not. You have to do it. Right? Like
Yeah,
I'm framing an order as a request. Uh,
yeah.
so it started off with like a lot of like resistance on my end. And my only thing was like, my parents cannot get involved. I
Hmm.
do not want my parents to know. And like, even at that time, right, this therapist eventually, after a couple of sessions, we started talking, and he just was like, okay, this person is going through a lot. And he's like, I feel like you should be on medication. And I was like, no, because then I have to go to a doctor, I have to get my parents involved, and so that's not happening. Because the thing is, I was in a very bad situation,
Hmm.
right? Like I was severely depressed. I was self-harming. I was cutting. I had a very unhealthy relationship with food. I
Hmm.
had an eating disorder. Um, and it was like starting to affect my physical health as well. So he's like, you need medication. Um, I was just like, no, that's not happening.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, so like through therapy, how much ever we could, the self-harming kind of, I think that's what he focused on first, because he's like, okay, you need to stop cutting at least. So we kind
Yeah.
of worked that, worked through that, and then the eating disorder and the relationship with food. And that's something I still struggle with till today. But
Yeah.
that we kind of got. And then I switched schools after 10th grade. Because high school is up till 10th, and then you have 11th. And again, very, very lucky that the new school I went to also had school counselors. There they had a team of counselors. So I started going to one of them, and I was still very like, I would still not talk about it. And 11th and 12th, I was studying psychology as a subject. So anytime I would be going to the counselor, and like people would be like, oh, why are you going? And I would always say that it's for career counseling,
Uh,
because who better to get career counseled by than a person who has
exactly that experience in that career.
Yeah. And this was because we had to get like permission slips because counseling sessions would be during class hours.
Yeah,
So my parents found it, and I was like, oh no, career counseling, you know?
good cover you found.
Yeah. And when I moved to Pune for my bachelor's. I did my bachelor's from Ferguson College, which did
Hmm.
not have a college counselor, but I was also doing another course from St. Pius's at the time, which is also in Pune, and they had a college counselor who provided free therapy for students. So technically, since I was doing that course, and she was a really good therapist. The only issue was that because she was the college counselor, she was also counseling all of my friends from that course.
Oh, oh.
But all of us loved her, so we would like so a lot of our like friendship, like when we would hang out together, it would just be us talking about how amazing our sessions with her were. Like, oh my god, she's so amazing, and oh my god, she's so, like, I know one of my friends was like, I will one day build a shrine for this therapist and just like worship at it.
Wow, she must be
Yeah.
one hell of a therapist. Like, awesome.
Yeah. So that was really good. And when I moved back to Bombay for my master's, that was the first time I was like, oh no, now I have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So I looked for a therapist. I started going for therapy, and I was very infrequent because like being a student and also having college, and
Hmm.
the master's program that I was in was not a very like supportive, conducive for mental health sort of a program, uh, which is very disappointing considering everyone in that department has a PhD in psychology,
It
right?
is sad. It is sad. Just how, when you look
Yeah,
at the system, it is very sad. A lot of times people are
yeah,
not understanding.
yeah. Like again, at that time, I was like, my mental health was not good, and I told a professor who everyone was like, "Oh, you can talk to this professor. He's like one of the more approachable ones." So
Yeah.
I told him that I was feeling really suicidal, and I had been having a lot of like active suicidal ideation, and I was planning it, and it was kind of reaching those stages, and he just like looked up at me, and he's like, Tesha, you should study harder. I think that will solve your problems.
Oh my God.
Okay, that was not at all helpful. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Again, this person has a PhD in clinical psychology.
Oh my God. It's just,
This person teaches a subject called advanced counseling skills.
oh my
Uh,
God. Good he did not counsel anybody. I mean, I swear. What? Why would you say that to somebody?
yeah, and I mean, of course, to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he didn't hear what I said clearly, or maybe he misunderstood, or maybe he thought, maybe he just like misinterpreted what I was saying. Um, but yeah, I mean, like we had another student who was kind of not coming to class for a few days, and one of our professors is like, "Oh, where is she?" And then one of her friends was like, "Oh, she's actually going through some mental health issues, and she's finding it difficult to get out of bed and get out of the
Mm.
house." And this professor just goes, "These are all just excuses."
Oh my
Again,
God.
this is a person who has a PhD in counseling psychology. And I'm just like so flabbergasted and shocked by it, and then we
Out
had,
of the window.
yeah, 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 yeah. And so you become so hesitant to talk about it. Like at university, I couldn't tell anyone that I was going for therapy. Like I couldn't tell my professors. Um, and every therapist who I went to said the same thing, that Tarisha, I think you would benefit from medication. And I was always just like, no, I'm not doing that. And then in masters, one of the very, very most senior most professors, she was just like, oh, it's so ridiculous. Nowadays, they offer these 20, 21-year-old people pharmaceuticals for their mental health. What problems do 21-year-olds have that they need antidepressants?
Oh my God. I'm
And
just,
yeah, it,
I'm
it is it is really problematic. And like another professor was, the same one who said like, oh, these are all excuses. I remember like at one point he's like, if you have a client, who's coming to you for therapy and they go to a psychiatrist, that means you have failed in your job as a therapist.
oh my God.
And these are all
Wow.
that such ridiculous statements. Like when I think about university and like, when you get out of university, you realize that okay, you have a lot that you have to unlearn and relearn, and so many of these things are so problematic, but they still like enter your head and they create that stigma within you. And when I finally started working in 2019, I again had like a really bad mental health episode and I couldn't work. And when you're a student and you're in college and whatever, you can ask for an extension or like skip assignments and get a bad grade or whatever. You can't do that when you have a job. So again, my colleague and my boss, and the CEO was a psychiatrist, my boss was a counseling psychologist, and they were just like, I think you should consider going back to therapy. And because I had taken a break from therapy, so I went back, and again, they were like, have you considered medication? And I
Oh
was
my
like, yeah,
God.
I think it's time for me to consider medication. And
Yes.
finally, like in 2019, from like 2008 to 2019, 11 years later, I went to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist was like, why did you not come earlier? Like, if you have had these issues since you were a teenager, your personality was not fully formed there, your brain was not fully developed. The older you get, the more those things get set, right? And now your personality and your brain has developed with that depression. So it's now like become a part of you. I mean, that's a very um, depressing statement to hear.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. I mean,
yeah, and even then, even after getting the prescription, right, I struggled so much because I'm like, am I letting down the therapy community by taking these pills? Am I
oh,
like, am I overreacting? Do I really need, because all these voices of like, what my professors, and
yeah,
obviously they're my
professors.
professors, I look up to them, I respect them, like, are things really that bad that I need this? It couldn't possibly be that bad. Uh, so that sort of a thing was there, but I did take them, got off of them. Like with medication, there's been like a fluctuation of when I've been taking them and not taking them. um Continued with therapy also on and off. The therapy community in India is quite small.
Yes.
um so what happened was I was going to therapy to this person, and then I went to a friend's place for a party, and my therapist was there because they knew each other.
Oh my God.
Because I'm a therapist, she's a therapist, they're a therapist, everyone's a therapist, right? So it just turns out that they knew each other from somewhere. So and then we had to terminate sessions. So I'm like, okay, the next therapist I find will be from a different city. So I found a therapist in a different city, and then I found myself doing this like really, that whole like doctors make the worst patients. I'm like sitting and predicting what she's going to do next. I'm like, oh, she's
Oh,
making
yes.
this activity, she's making me do this. So I'm like, okay, I need to find a therapist who uses a modality I'm not familiar with. So I found a therapist in a different city who did expressive arts because at the time I didn't have experience with it. Um, I loved expressive arts and I loved that therapist. So I then did a course in expressive arts. And then she left the country and moved elsewhere to pursue further education. And so she terminated sessions.
Oh my God. This is a struggle.
Yes. So then I found a therapist from a different city with a different modality, which could not include expressive arts. So I found someone who did narrative therapy. And we had like a few sessions, maybe for like 2 months. And then they were just like, your case is very complex, and I don't really work with people who have autism. And so I can't work with you anymore. And we kind of terminated sessions. And she said this in like the last 5 minutes of our second last session.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, 1 second, I'm not autistic. Where did that come from? And over the years, I've had like a lot of things thrown at me. Like I went to one psychiatrist who was just like, I think you have some sort of personality disorder, but I'm not sure which one.
How can you say that then?
And this was first session, like first, because during the pandemic, I couldn't speak to my regular psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So I took like an online consult with somebody else, and it was like a 20-minute consult. And in the first consult, I'm like, it's not even been 20 minutes. How can you say this? Like,
I am just, I am just astounded by the fact that how people throw diagnostic things at you just like that. Oh, you might have this, you might have that. It's like selling popcorn.
Yeah. And then thankfully, like in the last session that I had with this therapist, I was like, what did you mean by that? She's like, oh, do you not have a diagnosis of autism? It was just so obvious. I thought you knew. And I'm
Ah,
like,
oh my
okay.
God. Did she
And
not take your history and know that what you have and what you don't have? Like,
I think she just thought that like I forgot to mention it or something. She's like, but like I think she genuinely believed that I knew it. And I was like, okay, cool. And I didn't. I just like sat. And this was like last year. This was 23 April. And I just like sat with that information for like a month, not knowing what to do with it, not looking for a new therapist, nothing. Finally, last May, I went and I got tested. And I was like, because I have a lot of friends who have ADHD, and they all say that I think you have ADHD because you
hmm,
have similar symptoms. And I've heard like depression, and I have like, so all these terms have been thrown around. So last year, finally, I'm like, listen, all of these things have been said to me. You give me all of the tests and you tell me what I have. You
good
know,
idea. Next.
yeah, I went, I research and I'm like, please, somebody recommend me a therapist who you trust, who you will like recommend for testing. I went to
Yeah.
the hospital, 3 hours, did like multiple tests, actually got like a full in-depth history taken because I had gone for testing once before, and that person did not take any history, just gave me the paper. They're like, oh, you're a therapist. No, then I don't need to tell you how to do this.
Why? Why? Like, why can't you treat the other person like a client?
Yeah, and the same thing, like, so I gave the test. I did have a few questions about it, and they just like, oh no, it's okay, just answer to the best of whatever you understand. And I'm like, okay. I continued, finished it. They're like, okay, come after 2 weeks for the report. Again, they're like, okay, I have a session starting in 5 minutes. The report is here. I'm sure you can figure it out. You're a therapist, you've been through this, you know how this works. And that report said that I had bipolar disorder. I'm like, I know that I don't. I have
I
a history of bipolar in my family. I know what it looks like. I know that I don't have it. So this time when I went, I properly like told this person that all of these things have happened and this is what my history is like and this is this and this is that. And 3 hours, this person has sat and listened and administered all the tests and like, different psychomotor, psychometric, um,
everything.
ADHD, MCMI, all sorts of things. After like a good 3 weeks, she like sat and explained that, okay, yes, you are autistic. She explained what
Okay.
autistic traits were that were identifiable the most in me based on the assessment. She's like, you do show a lot of symptoms of ADHD, but you don't have ADHD. Um, but you have enough symptoms that you can get away with saying you have ADHD. I'm like, that
Hmm.
mean.
ADHD, I think, so is a very
Yeah.
the term has been used a lot, and plus it. I have heard a lot of people tell me. In fact, a clinical psychologist tell me that if you're going to get tested for ADHD, but you have
Yeah.
trauma and anxiety, it's gonna be a little difficult to diagnose you. And I'm like,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So they're like, that's what you have a history of trauma, you have a history of anxiety. I don't have any personality disorders. All of that came like within the normal range. And then but I have like major depressive disorder, pervasive depressive disorder. Like, okay, that was the one thing that I was kind of prepared for. The autism one threw me for a loop. Again, like for 2 months after that, I didn't do anything with that information. I just kept getting anxious because it was like, oh, this label that has been like put on me, right? And I also didn't understand autism enough to make sense of it, you know.
Yes.
So then kind of like being like, okay, these are labels. And this is only like the mental health side. Physical health side, other things have been happening. Chronic pain, autoimmune,
Oh my
PMDD,
God.
PCOS, all of these things, right? So, and of course, there's such a like mix of these two. And anytime you go to the doctor for a physical health thing,
You
either
have
they
to.
like lose weight or they like take less stress.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think I want to take stress? Do you think I'm doing this on purpose?
No, I have a hobby of taking stress. Every day I sit down and purposely take out time to actually take some stress on.
Yeah. Um, yeah. But
You've
that has been the situation. I did then finally like go back to, and so this therapist who like did the testing and everything was like, so I would suggest you go to a psychiatrist, start medication for your depression, find a therapist who you can work with long term,
yeah.
especially one who knows how to work with autism and all of these things, and also maybe try occupational therapy. It's like, okay. So after like a good 2.5 months, sometime in July, I did go back to the psychiatrist. I started like sitting and making all those appointments. I found a new therapist. So now I'm going regularly to a therapist. Uh, I did start medication in between, and that also has gotten weaned off. So then started doing all of those things and kind of like where I'm at now.
You've had a very, very roller coaster kind of a journey in case of therapy and your mental health, I would say. I mean,
I
change.
also want to emphasize that I'm trying to keep this like brief and short because I understand time and like people are listening and they might get bored halfway through, and so I'm also trying to like just be like, is this important, then say it, is this part of the story, then say it, otherwise.
Definitely. I mean, I think so. You've had a good amount of experience with understanding which mental health professional would work and which would not work for you, probably. Now you
Yeah.
have enough experience in that also, because I have understood that one of the biggest issues which we have in our industry is also that not everybody is equipped enough to actually help everybody. And not
Yeah.
everybody, and then the clients also don't know how to pick a therapist. Sometimes they pick a therapist who's not even had enough qualifications to be called a therapist. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of bad therapy cases also come up, and that is why it's really important that we really talk about that. Okay, how to actually pick a good therapist, how to actually be sure that this is a therapist I can talk to.
Yeah. I think like one of the biggest takeaways is like listen to your gut. If your gut tells you that, if you have like this inner voice just being like, oh, I don't think this is the right therapist, it's
Yeah.
probably not the right therapist.
Yeah, because you have to be comfortable enough to be able to open up. And if your gut is like, don't, then how will you actually do that?
Yeah.
So considering that this roller coaster ride has now, I think so, you've finally got on a good hold of like what's going on. What were
Yeah.
certain coping strategies or self-care practices which you have now? I'm sure one of the things might be your hobbies as well, because you shared there were such nice things that they keep changing, but you have some hobbies. I think so they also
Yeah.
have.
I
But
think for me, more than that, it's also been like people, like having people around me, like going out and meeting people, being around my friends, being around like my family, even extended family members.
wow.
Uh, Along with that, for me personally, mindfulness has been super helpful. I know some people really don't like the idea of mindfulness and they're just like, oh, it's all this woo woo thing. For me, the whole thing, I find it works. I've tried like things like radical acceptance and especially grounding strategies, grounding techniques. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm big fan of like the 5 4 3 2 1. You
Oh,
know,
I am also a big fan of 5 4 3 2 1.
yes, it's like one of my like go to approaches to come back to myself, come back to my body, stop the thoughts from like consuming me, taking over. Um, I think those have been major ones. I've also had like a fairly lifelong ish struggle with sleep.
Hmm.
So in our family, the running joke or the rule is that if Tanisha is sleeping, let her sleep. And this is something like even my grandmother is just like, if you're getting sleep, you sleep. Leave everything else. Like I have a meeting, I can't leave everything else. So, within reason, if I can sleep, sleep. And that has actually been helpful because um that allows me to at least get some physical and mental rest, which otherwise was not happening. So
Yeah.
I'm always tired, but I was even more tired. So that has also been helpful. The hobbies have been, I really enjoy painting. I've tried like different versions of it. Like I did face painting in between. Then I did like
Wow.
painting on actual paper. Tried like canvas. But that act is actually very soothing and relaxing. And I try not to do like, okay, I'm going to draw this fruit and then paint this specific fruit. It's just paint whatever you feel like.
And I think so that's very important. Paint whatever you feel like, because um, I come across people who tell me that, oh, I'm not good at painting, then why will I paint? I'm like, hobbies are not supposed to are not meant to be like, oh, I can do this, I'm good at it, that's why I do it. Hobbies are supposed to give you pleasure. So do it for pleasure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I was also very lucky. Just after my master's, I met this group of people who were running an organization which was all about like play as adults, about how like as kids there's no questions asked and we just play so freely, but as
Yeah.
adults we don't really do that. Or even when we do play, it's like these very like complicated games with complicated rules, and like, oh, can you
Yes.
make a poker face and like hide your emotions even while playing. um you know so they were kind of trying to be like playtime for adults, and I got in touch with them more during the pandemic because things moved online, so even though we were in different cities we could still connect. And it became like this whole community of people who believed in play for learning, play for fun, play for whatever, who believed in accepting you for whoever you are, even if you're neurodivergent, even if you're annoying and overbearing at times, even if you're clingy, even if you're needy, like whatever, right? Just who you are, and we love you for who you are. And um that having that community during the pandemic was really helpful. They were very like anti hustle culture, like,
Wow.
"Oh, you missed the meet. Oh, you missed our scheduled call because you wanted to sleep. That's amazing. Did you have an interesting dream?" Like,
Wow.
you know, so that
Parallel
was,
universe.
yeah, it was so good to have that. I think that was like one of it, and it still is. These people still are like a huge part of the support system that goes into coping.
That's beautiful. I mean, play for adults is a beautiful concept. I don't think so. We think about it at all as adults. We don't think about play.
Yeah,
I would like to incorporate it in my life as well if possible. It's a
yeah,
beautiful
yeah,
concept. Okay, so were there any? I think so. You have shared a lot of self care and coping strategies. Was there any unexpected source which you actually discovered? Like, I think so. This play group might be one of them, right? That
yeah.
play for adults.
Play for
Anything else?
adults. So I had like body image issues and eating disorders, and
Hmm.
I still am very self-conscious about how I look and things like that. Um, I always wanted to be into like performative arts. Like as a kid, I really wanted to do ballet, but
Okay,
I was 4 and we lived in Faridabad in Haryana, and there were no like
you
ballet
can't
classes.
see ballet class there.
I'm sure today you can. Today it's a very different world. I'm talking about like literally 20 years ago.
Definitely.
And we didn't have that at the time, and so that never happened. And then I was like, okay, I'll do gymnastics. And we went to like observe a gymnastics class happening, and I'm like, oh, I can't do this, because I'm also like a very scared person. Like in general, it's just like fear. I'm like, I will fall, I will break my neck, I will break my spine. I'm not doing all that. you know but I always wanted to do something which was like beautiful and graceful and flexible. And so again last year, I started doing this thing called aerial silks, which is like these silk
Yeah,
ropes sort of hang from the ceiling, and you kind of like do various different poses and stuff on it. So I'm still learning, I'm still like at very beginner levels, but it's so much of fun to do. And
I can
you
imagine.
also learn, like I also learned how out of shape I am, because you need to be so in shape to do it. Like I don't have any upper body strength, I don't have any core strength. I have slight little bit lower body strength, that's about it. uh but every class I go, that you can like feel the progress happening, because it's like, oh hey, today I can like do a pull up for 3 seconds, last class it was 2 seconds. And that's the progress, but it's still progress. And I'm very lucky to have like a really great teacher who is like, oh my god, you've made progress since last class, that's so great. um it's a lot of fun to do. It's a lot of like, it's also been like helping me feel slightly less self-conscious about my body, about what I look
Hmm.
like. So that's been really great. Yeah.
That's actually one unexpected source I would ever imagine. Like, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I'm sure
Yeah.
I would be hanging there, but I won't be able to pull or do anything. My upper body and lower body both are not at all in shape. But yeah, I'm glad you found something like that. So, considering that, you've had these different experiences, what would you, advise somebody or suggest somebody who is actually struggling to seek help, or, who is struggling to ask for support and seek professional help for that matter in case of mental health issues?
Then I get it. I understand that it is difficult. I've had so many like bad experiences that I know that that is a possibility. And I know that that is one of the fears that people have, that what if you find a therapist who invalidates you, or who doesn't
Yeah.
understand you, or who doesn't support you. So
Hmm.
I get that it is scary, but also when you find the right therapist, it unlocks the life that it brings you closer to the life you want to live, right?
Yeah.
And for so long, there was such a gap between the life I was leading and the life I wanted to live, and kind of realizing that, oh, I could be closer to that life
Hmm.
uh, was something that was really important and beneficial for me. And I think people can have that experience with therapy.
I mean, it's like you have to take that one step. It might be scary, but it at the end of the day, you might find somebody, and it might be worth it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you for sharing your story. But all the people who are listening or watching or whatever, what is a message or what is something you want them to take away from this? Or what sort of an impact you want your story to have on people?
So I think one thing that I have learned, and this is going to sound so cliched, but there's like this image which is like people think progress looks like this, and it's just a straight upwards line,
Yeah.
and then real progress looks like this, and it goes up and down. And
Yeah.
that is actually true, because if you see my story, I was depressed, and then I got better, and then I got depressed again, and then I was better, and like think bad things were happening, but good things were happening, and bad things were happening, but good things were happening, and sometimes they were happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And that progress and that journey of life is never going to be like one straight line, and it is going to be up and down, and that's okay. The other thing is, so when I became a therapist, I started a private practice, and it was called the Yellow Brick Road, which was
Yeah.
a reference to the Wizard of Oz, which is the story. And of course, it's like a long, complicated story, but it's basically this girl who gets transported to a magical world, and she has to find this Wizard of Oz to help her get back home. And
Hmm.
she's told to follow the Yellow Brick Road to reach the wizard. And on the way, she meets these friends, and they all have their own like problems that they are looking to go to Oz to solve. And I feel like with therapy, it's somewhat like that. A lot of people who come into therapy, and even when I went to a therapist, it was like, oh, this person is going to solve all my problems. And
Yeah.
as therapists, we don't do that. We don't have a magical solution to your problems, and we
Yeah.
don't tell you what to do.
Hmm.
Um, and that was precisely what happened with Oz. When they reached there, he's like, I can't tell you what to do. You already have the strength and the capability and the skills within you to do those things. Right. And it's like you already are brave, you already have heart, you already are smart. You don't need me to give you those things. Right.
Yeah.
But I can give you tools to make you feel that way. And that's what a therapist does. We give people the tools to feel empowered enough to live the life that they want to lead. Um,
Yeah.
And again, the other thing from The Wizard of Oz, the Yellow Brick Road, she didn't make that journey alone. She had friends and people who were with her, right? And that
Yeah.
again goes back to what I say about community and having people who believe in you and who support you. And so I think that's a very interesting metaphor, and that's what people who are looking for mental health support should look for, right? Like a therapist who can help them find the tools to harness their potential and support of friends and community.
That's a beautiful metaphor. I love the metaphor, the yellow brick road. And yeah, I think so. It's very important that as therapists, we do talk about that we're not going to fix you. You
Yeah.
already have the things you need inside you. We're just going to help you with the tools to actually feel like, yeah, I can do this kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And And that's a beautiful thing, actually. I love the metaphor, Tanisha. Absolutely love it. How thoughtful and how beautiful it is. It's the essence of therapy in a way, that how it captures everything, that, oh, you have it in you. Just, I'm going to help you with, yeah.
Yeah,
That's,
rereading the book and just having like this aha moment of like, oh my god, this is such a good metaphor for therapy was like, yeah,
that is why I'm at the Yellow Brick Road is a very interesting name for a therapy practice. I don't think so I've ever heard that.
yeah,
So, yeah. So now at this point, I know I have been saying a lot of things. I would actually like to now pause here and say thank you so much, Tanisha, for sharing your story. It was a lot of things, and it was a beautiful story which you shared, because there were a lot of ups and downs. But again, I think so people feel hopeful when they hear that, there's a down, there's going to be an up as well.
yeah.
And I hope that you also felt, I hope you got something out of this conversation. I hope you felt something that made you feel like, oh, yeah, it was a good idea to come here and talk about it.
Yeah, no, I feel like maybe I spoke a little too much because I know we had like other things that we may have wanted to talk about, and feel like the story took up so much time we didn't get into those things.
No,
But I'm really glad that we had this conversation, and I feel like I hope that other people also benefit from it. I feel like having the story of like, oh, therapists do understand what a bad therapist looks like is kind of
very,
important also.
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And with all the stigma and all the misconceptions and all the misinterpretations people have about therapy, having these conversations is even more important now. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interview you. And thank you everyone for listening. And if you want to share your story, you can write to me at thecozymindbyharshita@gmail.com. And I hope to see you in the next episode. And stay hopeful, people. Bye-bye.
Bye.